Kanye West just came out with a song called Cousins, where he admits to having homosexual relationships with his cousin for about 5 years or so, right? From ages 8 to 14, I believe. That's about 6 years. And everyone's very confused about why he would even come out with something like that. And in a way, I kind of am as well. After all these years of being a rapper, there's really no need to come out with something like that. But I'm grateful he did. Because in trying to describe his creative process for that song, he said something on stream that really got my mind thinking. It was in how he was describing the creative process of that song that he said something that stuck out to me, something that I feel like I have to talk about today. He said, while he was describing his creative process when he was making the song Cousins, that he and his cousin were doing things that they copied, they saw in a magazine, and in pure kid fashion, they decided, let's reenact this. And they didn't realize or know to feel wrong or bad about it until someone else, a third party, told them to feel bad about it. And then that's when it began to fuck with his head and his identity and what he thought that meant for himself going forward, etc. Right? Shame and guilt, they're very powerful things. When I was 13, I lost my virginity to an older woman. An older woman, mind you, that was like a family friend, right? That's kind of how I lost my virginity. And right after, I fell into, till this day, the deepest, darkest depression I have ever been in my life. I was 13 years old, and basically, I pretty much lost my virginity on a dare. It was a situation that I genuinely felt a lot of control in. I'm not sitting here acting like, oh, I'm a victim, I got taken advantage of. In reality, I put myself in that position, right? And I lost my virginity. And I'm gonna tell you right now, not to spoil it for later, but you know what? I'm not even gonna say that right now. Let's just go through the entire timeline as I experienced it. So I lost my virginity, and it was on a random Wednesday or something, right? Like sun was out, my parents were gone or something like that, and this family friend come to visit because she would babysit me from time to time. It was kind of the arrangement we had. And I was in the shower when she showed up. She barged in. I was in the middle of masturbating. And so I was erect, obviously. One thing led to another, and she began to dare me as to what I could do, my sexual prowess. And I didn't want to be caught lacking, right? I didn't want to be the inexperienced nerd, the inexperienced dweeb. So I decided, you know what? I'm gonna play along with this because I am curious about how this whole thing works. But I genuinely thought it would just be a bunch of kissing, touching. There would be no inserting going on. And eventually, that's what ended up happening. Not that I couldn't say no, not that I couldn't say stop. I was just so curious. I wanted to see what was the whole thing with sex. I wanted to see what was going on with well, how good does it really feel? And so it happened. And I'll never forget, even while she was riding me, while she was on top of me, I was trying to poke in there to see if there was like an end to the vagina. Because again, just a curious mind trying to figure out what the fuck's going on here, right? And then I came. And then my eyes opened. To describe this moment, it's like what I assume Adam felt the moment he ate that forbidden fruit, right? It was like, oh shit, now I am naked. Except for me, it wasn't now I'm naked because I already knew I was naked. It was, oh shit, what have I done? I immediately entered a panic that I have since then never felt ever again, but I very vividly remember because I had realized what I had done. I had essentially broken a promise I kept to myself, or I was keeping to myself at the time. The promise that I wasn't going to have sex outside of marriage. I grew up in a religious home, right? I grew up with two parents that are, till this day, ministers of the gospel, right? My dad was already a pastor at this point, my mom a deaconess. And I was a pastor's boy. That was who I was. That was my identity. And even back then, I was telling myself I would be preaching in front of crowds of people. I'd be spreading the gospel. I'll just follow in my dad's footsteps because that was what I was trained to do. That was what I was raised to do. Right. I attribute a lot of my public speaking skill today to that point in my life. Those moments where I was being brought up to be essentially the next big mega church pastor and whatnot. And when I lost my virginity in the way I did, I felt disappointed in myself. I genuinely did. But even more importantly, I felt terrified because I was convinced that I was going to go to hell. I'm I'm not even kidding. As funny as that sounds now, looking back, I was convinced of this. I believed this. Like, oh my God, I've been told by every Sunday school teacher, every, ministry based mentor of mine that sex before marriage is wrong, sex before marriage is bad. Never do it. It'll send you straight to hell. I'm going to hell now. I'm hellbound. All right. And I carried that guilt with me for the next 3 months. I went to church, never missed a service. Not that I was missing service before this point, but I pretty much devoted myself or redevoted myself to God and to Christ and to, the seat of pastor and all that good stuff. I was doing everything and anything to overcompensate for what I thought was a massive wrong I had done against God. Right. But it was miserable. I was miserable. And it was the first time in my life I was genuinely miserable. I was so fucking depressed. I felt like no matter how hard I was trying, I wasn't feeling the love of God around me anymore. I wasn't carrying the presence of the Holy Spirit with me anymore. As silly as that sounds, it really did feel like that. Until one day, I eventually told a friend of mine that unfortunately isn't here with us anymore. R.I.P. Michael Opara. My friend Michael was an interesting individual. You know, he was a special friend of mine. We went to high school together. And of course, at this time, I was in high school. But Michael would eventually succumb to his illness. He had sickle cell anemia when we hit 16. But at this point in time, we were, I want to say, just about to turn 14. And I told him, like, yo, I lost my virginity. It happened. And he told me to tell him everything that happened. And I recited the story to him. And he said, wow, congratulations. I had told two friends before him what happened, but he was the only one that told me congratulations. It didn't make sense to me. The other two friends had told me it was wrong. In fact, the second one I told, I'm not going to mention his name here, he straight up tried to make me feel like I got taken advantage of, like I got essentially raped, right? And he was angry about it. He was like, we should go report her to the authorities. It was a whole thing. It was funny. I had to calm him down. But Michael was like, congratulations. You've done something most people our age won't be able to do for another few years. And for whatever reason, when I heard that, it's not that I just felt good, because to say I felt good is an understatement. I felt relief. For the first time in months, I felt relief when he said that. Not from the love of God, not from anything a pastor would have said to me, not from anything else, not from all that time reading the Bible. It was him saying congratulations that made me feel relieved. And that bothered me because it made me feel like, why do I feel good hearing someone congratulate me for losing my virginity the way I did? That must mean I'm a bad person. That must mean I don't regret what I did, but I clearly do. So why am I looking for a weird psychological escape from my rightful penance, is what I was telling myself. So I spent the next few days pondering over this, that feeling I had of relief, like feeling good from being told congratulations for losing my virginity. And I began to really think about it. I attribute this point in time in my life to the first time in my life I actually began to think and self-reflect, right? And I began to really think about what had happened to me and what I had thought had happened to me and what everything meant. And I realized very quickly that the reason I felt so bad, so down, so depressed after I lost my virginity really came down to what I thought the consequences were. I didn't feel bad about the sex. I never did. I had to come to terms with that. I didn't feel bad about who I had the sex with. Never did either. Had to come to terms with that as well. In fact, it was a very blissful, pleasurable learning experience. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. Which, by the way, admitting that I enjoyed it alone gave me even more guilt while I was thinking about this. But you get the point. I digress. I had to admit to myself the sex wasn't the issue. It was the fact that I thought God was going to punish me because I had sex outside of marriage. So then I began to ask myself, okay, hold on. What does God actually think about sex outside of marriage? And I began to do some research. At this point in time, I didn't exactly have direct access to the internet. I had to go to a public cafe to pay for it. And I had to save up money to get the money to go to the public cafe to pay for it. So it was a few weeks, maybe 3, 4 weeks before I was able to finally get the time to do my research. And then even then, I paid for 30 minutes on the internet in this public cafe, and I probably spent the first 20 minutes just doing stuff I wasn't there to do because I was embarrassed to type in the word sex in a public computer, right? Because I thought someone was watching over my shoulder. But eventually I worked up the courage to, because, something about time and urgency and not having enough money to buy another 30 minutes, that's a lot of motivation. So I did. And I began to do research for that bit of time that I had on what exactly God said about sex before marriage. So you can imagine my surprise when I found out that in the entire Bible, A to Z, the God doesn't actually directly say anything at all, good or bad, about sex before marriage. The only references I had for why I thought God was going to punish me for having sex outside of marriage was what other people had implied to me my entire life. I was pissed. Genuinely. I was angry. Because, like, wait a minute, have I been believing a lie? I began to ask questions. I began to ask people within my church, even mentors of mine, like, what exactly does God say about marriage? Now, I wasn't going to go about, questioning these people. I wasn't in a position to, and they all knew my mom, so I was kind of scared of them going back to my mom with, um, word of what I was doing. I just wanted to see what they would answer. Like, what does God say about marriage, sex outside of marriage? What exactly does God say about it? I asked about 5 different people. They all had very different answers. And worse off, they all pulled out very different scriptures to back up their answers, which I later went home to do research on my own for all these different scriptures. None of those scriptures, when you read them in context, the entire chapter up to the point, right, actually had anything to do with sex outside of marriage. Shocked the hell out of me. Shocked the hell out of me. Right? Literally, right? It shocked the fear of hell out of me, you could say. I was even more angry. But I also learned my lesson. Because what happened after I found all that out was something I'll never forget. Relief. Relief. I felt, for the first time in months, complete relief. Because I realized that what I had done, losing my virginity the way I did, wasn't what made me feel bad. It was the way I thought about it. The only person that was punishing me for those months while I was down and depressed was me. Not God, me. Not even society or the group think I was in, the church. Their belief system didn't bully me. I allowed it to. And so clearly I went the next few years just trying to understand God a little deeper. Honestly, I kind of went I kind of backslid. I kind of went through my little phase of doubting God and the existence of God and all that. But which, by the way, I genuinely think is a necessary process. If you are going to believe in God, you do have to go through a process of unbelief, because that's what makes your belief stronger when you come back. But I digress. The point is, I realized that a lot of the things that I was led to believe about how God operates, how God works, and what he genuinely cares about is false, and was given to me by people that had their own agendas to push on me. That pissed me off, but that's the truth. And so going forward, when I began to really discover women, when I began to really understand what women are, how they function, what they respond to, I began to very quickly reconcile what women are with the concept of a creator. It didn't make any, it wasn't confusing to me anymore. Like when I began to study evolutionary psychology, for instance, and people will ask me till this day, how can you believe in God and also believe in evolutionary psychology? Well, because when I began to study evolutionary psychology, but I did it from the perspective of understanding that God is a gamer. In case no one's ever told you that, God is a gamer. That's why he made this whole simulation a game, right? And in true gamer fashion, he made a bunch of rules that would govern the game, the algorithm of this game. And it's a cause and effect world. It made sense to me. It all made sense to me. Okay, we're human beings. We live in these bodies. We might be spiritual, but we live in these physical houses that we call our bodies. And as a result of that, we have all these biological impulse and stimuli that we respond to that drive us towards certain goals, namely biological imperatives: survive, replicate. And so our existence is learning how to balance that, our need for our physical, biological imperative, with our higher consciousness, a spiritual awakening. That's what being human is all about. And science supports that. And religion, if studied correctly and seen from the correct perspective, also supports that. The Bible is literally saying that the entire story through the person of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the perfect example, in my opinion, of perfectly God and perfectly man. Spiritually awakened, but also honoring our biology. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's something that I or you should be ashamed of. I don't think getting with women, having sex with girls, even in or outside of the confines of marriage, should be something that you see as so damning that God will punish you forever for. Come on, like, God has bigger things to worry about. Not that he worries, but you get the point. Where you stick your dick doesn't hold as much consequence as you think it does. Not in the grand scheme of things. Now, granted, I'm not encouraging you to move through the world being this lustful beast with no self-control. But you have to admit, we live in the cause and effect world. A world where it is impossible to get good at anything if you don't practice. So how can you convince me or yourself that you can actually build up self-control with women if you do nothing but avoid them? Stupid. That's like saying you'll get good at basketball by never touching a basketball or going to a basketball court. That makes no sense. In order to learn how to control your lust with women, you must surround yourself with them. In order to control your greed with money, you must have money first. You will never trust someone who is broke and poor and in desperate need of money with the passcode to your bank account, right? Well, there you go. I'm using this video as an opportunity to teach you to let go of that guilt and shame you feel around loving women. It's okay. It's okay to love women. It's okay to touch them. It's okay to kiss them. It's okay to have sex with them. That happened throughout the Bible, right? Do your own research. Really, like literally do your own research. And I'm speaking specifically to Christians here, obviously, but no matter what religion you practice, I'm sure there's room in your religion for the ability to mingle with women correctly. You cannot stay away from something and expect to get good at it or build a solid relationship with it. That's impossible. Mingling and fellowship are necessary, and that includes the opposite sex. God made it that way. Don't forget who invented sex now, not you or I. God. God did. It's from Jason Favorite Scientist. Do with all this information what you must.